So now I'd like to introduce our next pair of speakers who are from Florida, sunny Florida. Director of Water Reclamation at the Emerald Coast Utility Authority, or ECUA in Florida. He oversaw the actual replacement and movement of the Main Street wastewater treatment plant to a different location to address repeated floodings. And he'll be joined by David Carr, a senior environmental engineer with Baskerville Donovan Consultants. David served as the project manager for the wastewater treatment replacement project, where he was integral in the conceptualization, planning, development, siting, and funding and permitting of the project. So Don, I believe you're the first one to start.
Thank you, David. I want to start by saying I'm not a schmo. But I am a water reclamation director, which means I have responsibility for our 3 wastewater treatment plants. And this is about moving one of our wastewater treatment plants that used to be called the Main Street Wastewater Treatment Plant. This was done as an alternate project, even though it says replacement project there. We did replace one plant and build a new one, so that's the title. The picture you see there is of the new plant that was paid for with a lot of FEMA money, and I'm going to give you a little background about our utility. So to start with, we are in Pensacola, Escambia County, Florida, basically very close to the Alabama state line. You get off the interstate exit 12. We're about as far west in Florida as you can go and still be in Florida. We have a small to medium-sized utility. We have about 65,000 customer connections, 3 wastewater treatment plants. This is the largest plant, 22.5 MGD. We have 2 other plants. We have about 380 lift stations and about 1,300 miles of sewer pipe. Back in early 2000, ECUA formed a committee due to public input to study whether to upgrade in place or replace the Main Street wastewater treatment plant with a new facility. It was the Strategic Main Street Replacement Team. They called themselves the SMART Committee. And they came up, funded a study. The county got involved. We are a special authority. We were set up by the state legislature. We took over the infrastructure of the city and the county. And the idea was to implement cost savings due to one entity operating them both and to close down a bunch of facilities, and we did that. But we are a separate authority, but the county was involved, joint kind of support from the county. There's a lot of people wanting to move the plant, but the study came forward and said, well, we really want to move the plant and not upgrade it where it was. And there's some reasons to that, but out of the study, the problem was, like most governmental studies, we didn't have any funding. The board was not willing to say, we're going to increase rates enough to move a wastewater treatment plant. So they set forth kind of a funding plan. They said, we're going to come up with 3 sources of funding. We're going to try and get a third of it federal, a third of it state, and a third of it local. And that's kind of where we started off on this project. Why did they want to replace it? We had a history of problems at this plant. There are some things that could be solved by upgrading the plant, but there were some things that could not be solved by upgrading the plant. It made more sense to move the plant. One of those is the elimination of a discharge into a surface water, Pensacola Bay. We had a lot of odor problems. We had a dryer, sludge dryer. We replaced it with, we had a sludge incinerator, replaced it with a dryer. They both had their share of odor issues. We had primary sludge. We spent a lot of money trying to fix those, and it helped, but it certainly did not fix them. By moving the plant, we had some opportunities for reclaimed water, but as you see in the upper right there, one of the main things it did was move it out of the floodplain. If we can move the plant, we had been flooded. The floodplain in this case is a hurricane floodplain, and not necessarily a flooding from rain as much as it is from storm surge. We had the plant inoperable several times due to hurricanes. We met Class 1 reliability by having 2 separate electrical feeds from 2 separate substations, but in multiple occasions, due to hurricanes, we were without power. We also wanted to upgrade the treatment technology, as was mentioned in the last presentation. So those were the main reasons to replace it, and that's why there was a move to replace it. In 2004, about a year and a half after the plan was finished, we had a major hurricane hit us just to the west of here. It was a strong, very strong Cat 3 when it made landfall. And this drawing, or this map here, is of from FEMA showing the high water mark at the plant. So let me see if I can get them. So I don't know whether you can see this or not, but you can see the high water line. Did I get it? I don't think I got it. There's a high water line. There it is. Showing the extent of the flooding from the hurricane, and then you see the plant. Do I move that? Yeah. You can see the outline of our plant here. That was totally inundated, and the other thing you can see very clearly in this picture is our location to Pensacola Bay. The storm surge came up, inundated the plant, hit at 2 a.m. Tuesday morning. We were without power for about 3.5 days. There was flooding in the streets. One of the things you can see in this picture is this. I'm struggling, but there's a car on the street. This is my public service announcement. Stay out of the storm water because that's a treatment plant that's not working. There's no pumping capacity at the plant. That car that you see on the main street is driving through basically wastewater. And that's one of the reasons people tell you to stay off the street. Some of the details I just went over, but we had a 12-foot storm surge, which inundated a lot of the plant, electrical components. We were able to dry most of those back out and get them running again, but there's a lot of concern over latent damage. How much damage did the salt water do? How long were the components going to keep working? What was it going to take to replace all the electrical? So we had a very major hurricane hit us, and the big result of the hurricane was that we had a plan to move the plant. We had some public support, but it shifted from kind of a thing we need to do to something we have to do. It solidified the public to wanting to move the plant. Solidified it from the standpoint they got behind the county commissioners, the city council, the local legislative government, the state government, the federal government. FEMA went around after the hurricane, held public meetings and said, what can we do to help you recover from this event? And the public was very good about saying, help us move the Main Street wastewater treatment plant. And that helped us work with our SHMO. Miles Anderson was instrumental in making this happen. And so that was the main thing that happened with Hurricane Ivan. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to David Carr.
Good afternoon. As Don mentioned, prior to Hurricane Ivan, we had a feasibility study that basically indicated we need to get the plant out of downtown Pensacola and away from the danger of the hurricane surges and high winds. This is the plan that resulted from that feasibility study. And like Don said, it was completed in about late 2002. And from 2002 through Hurricane Ivan, we were pursuing funding. And with Hurricane Ivan, that funding became much more possible. So through the feasibility study, we developed this rough plan. While we were pursuing funding, we also started on a facilities plan, and that facilities plan resulted in the details of this. Excuse me just a second. In the lower corner of the map, you can see that's where existing treatment plant is. At the very top end of the map, you can see where our new wastewater treatment plant is, the Central Water Reclamation Facility. That's approximately 18 miles inland. You can see some major features of this system included 3 regional pumping stations and force mains ranging from 18-inch up to 54-inch. And what this gained us is hurricane resistance through the elevated construction up in the north end of the county. The regional lift stations are also made hurricane resistance through elevation of the electrical panels, including redundancy in the pumps, including emergency power generation. So through those means, we're able to essentially construct a system that is not hurricane-proof, but much more hurricane-resistant than the previous Main Street wastewater treatment plant. Basically, a Cat 1 storm would start flooding problems at the Main Street plant. We experienced a Cat 3 on September 16, 2004, which put the plant out of commission for several days as done. The main feature of this replacement plan is the new treatment plant. As I mentioned, it's about 18 miles inland. It's designed as 22.5 NGD AWT plant, 5531, also capable of drying 20 tons per day. We achieved 100% reuse of our effluent through co-locating this plant in the midst of several industries, including Gulf Power and International Paper, to local industries that, being a Gulf power plant, uses a lot of water for cooling, and the paper plant uses a lot of water for its cooling purposes and process purposes. So we're able to get the benefit of 100% reuse there. Some other features of the plant include a reject storage capability that we did not have in our downtown location, and a 60 million gallon wet weather storage capacity that we also did not have in our downtown location. So through locating this facility off-site, we're able to significantly improve the treatment capacity, capabilities, and resiliency of the facility. This being a webinar on resiliency, I will point out that this didn't really start out as a resiliency project or a mitigation project. It started out as a repair project. But the ultimate result is to be a mitigation project, in that we were originally intending to repair just what we had downtown, even though we'd like to move it, but we couldn't find the money through our efforts up to 2004, and when Hurricane Ivan hit, it sort of changed the picture, as Don mentioned. To give you an idea of the cost of the project, these are the total costs for the construction of the replacement project. We had to demolish the existing plant after we finished up all the replacement. That was $4.5 million. I'll not go through these line by line, but basically we had $316 million worth of construction we had to undertake in order to eliminate the downtown wastewater treatment plant. In order to do that, we had been looking prior to Hurricane Ivan at any funding. Got to get this done. So we started getting a lot more open doors for us. Miles Anderson came in and was able to guide us through much of the FEMA process. Basically, we started out looking at just the repair aspect to say, how can FEMA help us get this thing back up and running, and what can we do from there to keep it from happening again. We went from the repair of the direct facility to looking at an improved project, which would include some unfunded mitigation efforts. We were looking through the public assistance program, the 406 public assistance program, which is primarily focused on repairing the damage. So at this point, we were not also looking at the 404 mitigation program, but just looking at the 406. So as we were guided through that process, it came up that the repair also includes a codes and standards clause, which basically says whatever you fix, you have to fix it up to current standards. But in Florida, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection is the authority having jurisdiction that defines the codes and standards. So basically, we talked to them and said, what do we need to do to meet your requirements? And they came back with a fairly extensive list that had a total cost of about $151 million. So after we recovered from that heart attack, we because that's how much they were telling us we'd have to spend, we worked, again, through miles with FEMA to determine that that cost was an eligible cost. So we could go with a 406 public assistance application for that $151 million project. The next step in that effort was to say we don't want to just build it here, even if we can build it better and make it more resistive. It's always going to be vulnerable to a storm surge and a large failure event. So we applied for an alternate project to redirect the repair funds to the alternate site, which is the alternate site as identified originally in the feasibility study and then in the facilities plan. We tried one step further, which is the permanent relocation. Essentially, we asked FEMA for the full cost of the replacement of the treatment plant, which was about $360 million. However, that permanent relocation requires a cost-benefit analysis, which we were unable to satisfactorily meet. Basically, we could prove out that we needed to repair and redirect for an alternate location, but the hurricane return frequency was not expected to be frequent enough to warrant the permanent relocation. And knock on wood, that's proved to be true since we haven't suffered a direct hit since then.
In 2005, we actually had another hurricane that a year later, in the middle of trying to get all this funding, the 2005 hurricane season hit, which had 10 or 12 hurricanes crisscross Florida and sent FEMA crazy, and did knock us offline again, but we didn't flood.
So with the project identified as the relocation of the Main Street treatment plant up to Central County, which hence the name Central Water Reclamation Facility, we had that project identified at $151 million cost based on the providing reasonable assurance per FDEP. That's their term for this is what we want you to do in order to keep having your discharge permit as the authority having jurisdiction. So that reasonable assurance requirement brought our total number up to $151 million. As I said, permanent replacement was denied based on the inadequate cost-benefit analysis. Alternate project request was approved, allowing us to build up in the north of downtown Pensacola. The funding matrix, and I'll call it that intentionally in that it was a matrix of 10 or 12 different funding sources, is as illustrated here, and I'll briefly go through these. The trick on this was that in order to meet the criteria of each funding agency and stay within their limits, we had to be aware of all their rules and then put a matrix together of how one funding source could serve as the set-aside or the match for another funding source. So it got very complicated very quickly. We had actually one full-time person dedicated to pretty well doing nothing but managing that matrix. But a quick rundown of our funding sources. We got a $7 million grant from the county with which we're located, Escambia County. That was basically to encourage us to get out of downtown. City of Pensacola, whose city limits the old plant is within, also encouraged us to get out of downtown. They gave us $19.5 million spread over a 20-year period. From the state of Florida Seavers grants, we got multiple grants starting 2004 through 2006, totaling $28.3 million. The one thing to note on there, the 2004 grant was prior to the Ivan event, so we had been getting some Seavers grants in to help us get this one going and work on the feasibility study and facilities planning. Beyond the Seavers, we had Water Management District grant, $4.9 million. We used some SRF funds, totaling $24 million over 3 years, I believe. State and travel grant, state and travel assistance grant of $0.8 million. We got a private bank loan, $129.7 million, and finally the FEMA 406 funds at $134.4 million. That was actually several different applications that were approved, along with the Main Street treatment plant being disrupted. Its outfall that goes several thousand feet out into Pensacola Bay was also disrupted. So we actually got two different FEMA grants, one at 120 million is another at 13.4 million for the actual cash outlays. I mentioned earlier that almost each of these had a match required. We used one fund to match the other. For instance, the 406 funds, they had a 10% match required. The state picked up 5%, and we had 5% from local sources to make those. That's my last slide on this. I just want to close with a couple of remarks on how this all came together. Again, the key in this, well, obviously the key in this project was the FEMA funds. Attaining those FEMA funds made a dream a reality. The means to attain those was with Miles' help. We figured out the rules, figured out how they could work to help us, and what requirements we need to meet all the requirements for the funds. And we made that our job to learn those and understand those, and we didn't try to buck the system or ask for anything that wasn't within the rules, which made it a fairly easy project to approve. We just stayed within the rules, played within the lines, and got everybody to work together and made the project happen.